All right, so today we're diving into some pretty intense stuff. This is something you sent in, and it's a speech by Aisha Yesufu, and it's directed at Nigerians who are living abroad. And let me tell you, she does not hold back.
It's a real call to action. I think the key takeaway here is how she links this deep desire to help family back home with the potential for self-destruction if Nigerians abroad aren't careful, that is.
Yeah, and she jumps right in with this scene, something that she actually witnessed in Scotland. It's early in the morning and she sees all these black people, likely immigrants, right? And they're already out there working.
Yeah, and it's this image that kind of sets the stage for her whole message. The idea that so many Nigerians in diaspora are on this treadmill just working themselves to death. And when you think about it, when you think about the recent deaths of some Nigerians abroad that Yesufu mentions, it adds this whole other layer of urgency to her message.
There's a real weight to her words. You can just feel it, right?
Yeah.
She's saying, hey, this is serious. And then she goes straight to the core of the issue, the pressure that these folks are facing from their families back in Nigeria. She even says, everybody wants you to solve their problem.
Right, the money that you have, it's not for you alone. Everybody must have of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's more than just pressure, though. What Yesufu's talking about here is this very deep cultural expectation, this obligation to provide for your extended family, even if it means sacrificing your own well-being. And, well, that's where things get kind of complicating.
Yeah, how do you even argue with that? It's family.
Yeah.
But then Yesufu throws out this analogy. You cannot help the poor by being poor yourself.
Right.
And then she takes it even further, adding, you cannot help the poor by being in the grave.
Wow, that's powerful.
I know, right?
It really is. It's like she's trying to shake people out of this mindset, to help them see the bigger picture. It's not about rejecting your family. It's about understanding that this pressure, this constant giving, can have some really serious consequences. You end up with no savings, you're always working, your health suffers. It's just not sustainable.
And the heartbreaking part is she points out that a lot of times people back home don't even appreciate the sacrifices that are being made.
It's true.
They just want more. She even tells this story about a family member who asked why someone who'd been sending money home for years had nothing saved up for themselves.
Ouch. Yeah, that really highlights the sense of entitlement, almost a lack of awareness of the toll it takes on the people sending the money.
Yeah.
And it's no surprise that Yesufu expresses some frustration, even resentment, towards people in Nigeria who seem content to rely on this diaspora support instead of demanding change from their own government.
Right. It's like you're over here busting your butt trying to help, and then you get that kind of response. It's like, where does personal responsibility end and the need for, systemic change begin?
It's a really complex issue.
It is.
And then Yesufu just drops this bomb on us. She says, you are also the problem.
Wow.
She's talking directly to Nigerians abroad, saying, you have turned us into beggars with our heart, and we don't know how to stand and fight for ourselves and go there and get a nation that works for everybody.
Wow. That is a tough pill to swallow. What's she saying here? Is she saying that helping your family is actually a bad thing?
Well, it's not that simple. It's more about recognizing the tension. The tension that exists between wanting to help your loved ones, which is totally natural, and the possibility that that very help might actually be preventing real, lasting change. It's like we're so focused on just putting Band-Aids on the problem that we never actually get to the root cause.
Okay, so are we enabling a broken system by just throwing money at it?
That's exactly the question that Yesufu wants us to grapple with. And it leads directly into her call for self-care and setting boundaries. She's very clear about it. She says, learn to say no. It's N-O, no.
No sugarcoating there. And she doesn't just leave it at that. She offers some actual practical advice, right? Like setting a fixed amount for family support, almost like you would with a charitable donation.
Right. If you think about it, if you approach it like a charitable donation, you remove some of that emotional baggage, you decide what you can realistically afford to give, and then you stick to it. It's like creating a budget for your giving.
Right. That takes the emotion out of it, and it helps with that guilt, too. It's not about being stingy. It's about being responsible. And it makes me think about that metaphor that Yesufu used, the one about someone trying to climb a tree, but they have all these people clinging to them, pulling them down.
Right. And the only way to reach the top, to actually be in a position to help others up, is to shake those people off. And sometimes that means saying no, even when it's really hard.
So it's not about being selfish. It's about being strategic. You have to take care of yourself first if you want to be able to help others in the long run. But this brings up another point that Yesufu makes, And it's a little controversial. It's not just about individual choices, is it? She's also criticizing the situation in Nigeria itself.
That's a great point. Yusufu's not just calling on individuals to change their behavior, she's challenging the systems that perpetuate these cycles of need and dependency. And she doesn't pull any punches. Remember that line about Nigerians and Nigerian not having sense?
Oh yeah, that one definitely got my attention. It sounds harsh, but then she clarifies that it's not about insulting people, it's about highlighting a systemic problem.
Right, exactly. What she's saying is that this constant flow of money from the diaspora can actually create a culture of dependency where people become reliant on these handouts instead of demanding better from their leaders, and that's the real danger because it lets the people in power off the hook.
So instead of pushing for better healthcare, better education, better infrastructure, people are relying on this individual support from abroad.
Exactly. It creates this really, really vicious cycle. The diaspora feels obligated to send money, which then props up this broken system, leading to more need and more pressure to send even more money. It's like trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. You keep pouring in the water, but it never gets full because the root problem's not being addressed.
So it's not just about individuals making different choices, it's about pushing for systemic change, right? But this raises another question. How can Nigerians in the diaspora support their families without perpetuating a system that's keeping them in need?
It's a tough question. There are no easy answers. But I think what Yusufu is advocating for is a more holistic approach, one that recognizes the need for individual responsibility, but also acknowledges the limitations of that responsibility in the face of these massive systemic problems.
So it's not an either, it's about finding that balance. Supporting your loved ones, while also pushing for the kind of changes that will create a better future for everyone.
Exactly.
But how do you actually do that? Where do you even begin?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in much more depth in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned. So we're back and picking up our deep dive into this powerful message from Aisha Yesufu to Nigerians in diaspora. And, it's not just about pointing out problems. It's about finding solutions.
Absolutely. Yusufu offers some really concrete advice on how to navigate these really complicated family dynamics. She really hammers home the importance of setting boundaries.
Right?
Remember that.
Yeah.
Learn to say no.
Yeah, it's N-O, no.
Right.
It sounds simple enough, but when you're dealing with family and cultural expectations, it can feel impossible.
Exactly.
How do you even begin that conversation? The guilt can be so overwhelming. But Yusufu's adamant that setting these boundaries, even with family, is key to self-preservation. For the listener out there, what does that actually look like? How do you set boundaries in this kind of context?
You have to realize that when you're constantly giving in to these demands, no matter how unreasonable, it just creates this cycle of resentment.
Right.
And, practically speaking, you end up with no savings, you're constantly working, your health starts to deteriorate. It's a recipe for disaster.
It is. It's like you're digging yourself into a hole that you can't get out of.
Yeah.
And remember that story that Yusufu shared about her first business failing because of family demands? That was really powerful. Here's this strong woman, successful, and even she wasn't immune to these pressures.
It just shows you how pervasive this issue is. And it really makes her advice that much more relatable. She's not speaking from some ivory tower. She's been there. So what can Nigerians in diaspora do? How can they actually start setting these boundaries and protecting themselves?
Well, Yusufu gives us a few strategies.
I'm ready to hear them. Because telling your family no can be so confrontational, especially when you're so far away. I'm thinking about the listener, trying to figure out how to navigate those conversations. One of the things that she suggests is establishing a fixed amount for monthly support, almost like you would with a charitable donation. Think about that for a second. By treating it like a charitable donation, you're taking out some of that emotional baggage. You decide what you can realistically afford to give, and then you just stick with it.
Right.
It's like, budgeting your giving, which can really take a load off.
Right. It takes that emotion out of it. And it helps with the guilt, too. It's not about being stingy. It's about being responsible. And it ties into that metaphor that Yesufu uses, the one about someone trying to climb a tree, but they've got all these people clinging onto them.
Exactly. Pulling them down. And the only way to reach the top, to actually be in a position to help others up, is to shake those people off. And sometimes, that means saying no, even when it's really hard.
So it's not about being selfish, it's about being strategic, right?
Yeah.
You have to prioritize your own well-being if you want to be able to help others down the line. This brings up another point that Yusufu makes, and it's a little controversial. It's not just about individual choices, right? She also criticizes the situation in Nigeria itself.
You're really hitting on a key point. Yusufu's not just calling on individuals to change their behavior. She's challenging those systems that make these cycles of need and dependency just keep going. And she's not afraid to say what she thinks. Remember that line? Nigerians in Nigeria not having sense?
Yeah, that was a strong statement. It sounds harsh, but then she walks it back a bit, explaining that it's not about insulting people, it's about highlighting a systemic issue. What's she really getting at? What's the danger here?
She's saying that this constant flow of money from the diaspora, it can actually prevent real progress from happening. It lets the leadership, the people in charge, get away with not doing their jobs.
I see. So instead of people demanding things like better healthcare, better education, they just become reliant on individual handouts from overseas.
Right. And that creates a really dangerous cycle.
Yeah.
It does. The diaspora feels obligated to send money, which just ends up propping up a broken system, leading to more need and more pressure to send even more money. It's like you said before, it's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. You just keep pouring water in, but it never gets full.
Because you're not fixing the root of the problem.
Exactly.
So it's not just about people making different choices. It's about pushing for that systemic change.
Right.
Right. But how can Nigerians in diaspora support their families without perpetuating this system that's keeping them in need?
It's a really, really difficult question. I don't think there are any easy answers. But Yusufu is advocating for a more holistic approach, one that acknowledges the need for individual responsibility, but also the limitations of that responsibility when you're talking about systemic problems.
It's about finding that balance.
Absolutely.
You support your loved ones, but you also push for the kind of changes that are going to create a better future for everybody. But how do you do that? Where do you even begin?
That's a really great question, and it's something that we'll explore a bit more in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Aisha Yesufu's message. And, it's been a pretty intense journey, right? We've talked about the pressure that Nigerians abroad are facing, the importance of setting boundaries. But there's this whole other layer to her speech that we haven't fully unpacked yet. It goes beyond just personal choices, right?
Right. Yusufu is connecting those personal struggles to a much broader critique of how things work, the systems in Nigeria. She's not just calling for individuals to change, she's demanding systemic change.
And she's not afraid to say what she thinks, is she? Remember that line about Nigerians in Nigeria not having sense? That was pretty bold.
Oh yeah, it was definitely provocative. But if you listen to her, she's not trying to insult anyone. It's about exposing a problem, like a flaw in the system. Think about it. When you have all this aid constantly coming in from overseas, it can actually stop real progress from happening. It can, because it lets the leaders, the people in charge, off the hook.
So instead of citizens demanding things like better health care, better education, they become dependent on these individual handouts from abroad.
Exactly. And that creates a really dangerous cycle.
Yeah.
It does.
Okay, I see what you mean.
It's like you're always trying to fix a leaky roof, but the problem is the foundation is cracked. You can keep throwing money at it, but it's never going to be truly fixed until you address that bigger problem.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day.
Yeah.
Teach a man a fish, and you feed him for a lifetime.
Yeah, it's about empowerment, not dependence.
Exactly. And that's where Yusufu's message gets really interesting. She's not just pointing fingers. She's actually offering a way forward, a more holistic approach that combines individual responsibility with changing the system itself.
Right.
So what would that look like? How do you balance supporting the people you love with pushing for change on a bigger scale? It seems like a huge task.
It is. It's a big challenge. But Yusufu's speech is really a call to action. She's saying, yes, help your family, but don't stop there. She wants Nigerians abroad to use their resources, their influence, their voices to push for real, lasting change back in Nigeria.
So it's about more than just sending money back home.
Yeah.
What are some actual, concrete ways that people can contribute to this bigger change? What would that look like?
Well, there's so many different ways to get involved. Some people might choose to support candidates who are committed to good governance and accountability. Others might focus on supporting NGOs that are working to improve healthcare, education, or create economic opportunities. Some people might choose to raise awareness through social media campaigns or by just educating themselves and others about the issues.
It sounds like there's no one right answer. It's about finding what works for you, what aligns with your values and skills, and then doing something.
Exactly. And it all makes a difference. Every little bit counts. It's about shifting the focus from those quick fixes to lasting solutions. It's about investing in a future where all Nigerians can thrive.
It's a really powerful vision, and it requires a collective effort, both from people in Nigeria and from those living abroad. But ultimately, it comes down to each individual making a choice. It's about realizing that you have the power to make a difference.
Yusufu reminds us that even small acts, like just saying no to something unreasonable, can be powerful. It's about not participating in a system that just creates more dependency.
And at the end of the day, it's about love.
Mhm.
It's about loving your family, loving your country, and wanting to see it reach its full potential.
It's about turning that love into action, into something that can really make a difference, that empowers people and creates a better future for everyone.
So for everyone listening, what does all of this mean for you? How does Yusufu's message connect with your own life, with your values, with what you hope for the future?
Ask yourself, are you just trying to fix things on the surface, or are you really committed to finding real solutions? Are you stuck in this cycle of guilt and obligation, or are you setting boundaries that help you and your loved ones?
We're not here to give you all the answers, but what we hope you take away from this deep dive is that sense of possibility, that you have the power to make choices that are in line with your values and that create a better future for yourself, for your family, for your country.
Remember those powerful words from Yusufu. Don't walk yourself to the grave. Take care of yourself, set boundaries, and focus on solutions that create real, lasting change.
And with that, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and we hope it's given you some new ideas. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep pushing for a better world for everybody.